Good morning, and joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions every Wednesday from 9 to 10 o'clock or thereabouts. We talk about some of the ish. Yeah. It's kind of funny, Mike. I always learned from you and all of the others before you that I've worked with that on radio, time makes a difference. There's like hard breaks and all kinds of stuff, and yet I'm still kind of ish. I'm still kind of a 9-ish.
Yeah, time is a theory.
Yeah, time's a theory for me. So but it is from 9 to 10 o'clock here on WSTU on Wednesdays. Generally, we're talking about things that affect you in your daily lives, some economic and financial issues, some things that we just want to talk about, get out there, some discussions that are good to have. We try not to get too political, but then again, we're all political, so sometimes you can't avoid some conflict in your discussion because, as I've said on this show a number of times, certain economic decisions have political ramifications. Certain political ramifications have economic decisions, affect economic decisions. So, the idea is not to get into a heated political discussion on it, but it is to discuss some of the issues that we're addressing, both nationally, internationally, locally, and everything else. So that's the purpose of the show. Just kind of have a general discussion about some of the economic and financial issues that we don't always consider, and it's kind of interesting because that drives so many decisions or affects so many decisions. We would love to do certain things and have a certain result take place, but sometimes that's not possible because economically it's not possible. So, we have to deal with some of those economics. And some of the, I said, some of this have some other ramifications, tax ramifications. My name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a local CPA and have been previously done some work in the banking industry. Was a banker for a number of years, having been CFO and COO of some decent-sized banks over the years, and have done some of that. So I've been exposed a little bit to finance for a while and economics. It's funny, as a CPA, it's interesting that CPAs, their definition of certain types of things, income, and other types of things, is different than the economic definition of income or expenses, and so it's economic income and economic profits are different than accounting profits, and so. When we're on this show, a lot of times I'm talking more about the economic profits rather than the income profits, but still, they're similar type discussion. It's always funny. The accountants and the economists always have arguments about the numbers because they look at them differently, and that's the issue. Is that sometimes we look at them differently. We're in a different vacuum, and we don't always realize what they mean. And so we don't realize how they impact us. So this morning, I want to talk about a couple things. But first of all, I want to give the phone number, 220-9788, 220-WSTU. That's the number in the studio. If you want to chime in or call, or you have a question or a point of view, be happy to take that and address the call. Again, like I said, hopefully keep it civil. Not dinero civil, but civil, so that we at least don't lose our license to broadcast here on the air. So, but I wanted to talk about a couple things and it may sound a little random, but it's not. They're all kind of tied back to the finance and economics issues and some of the things. First of all, I wanted to mention that I happened to see a thing on Facebook the other day. We had the Board of County Commissioners and the school board, and I think the city of Stuart had I think it's a quarterly meeting that they get together and discuss various issues that impact them. And there's public comment made and some comments, generally made. And one of the issues that came up in a general comment, I thought the comment was very, very good, although you're only given a couple minutes, but was a discussion about what's happening in the school system, particularly as it relates to teachers and teacher turnover and some of the issues that, we've been blessed here in Martin County with a very, very good school system. And we weren't blessed because we just happened to be lucky. We were blessed because I think over a period of time, the county has valued education, and we had developed a model that that produced a high quality education system without a significant amount of short-term costs, maybe some long-term costs, but not a lot of short-term costs, which allowed us to kind of be still stay competitive, but not bust the budget. And that and what I'm getting at is that here, when I was raising my kids in Martin County, the teachers didn't make the highest salary in the area. They did not make their annual compensation was less than St. Lucie County, less than Palm Beach County, but I think that the system was much more family friendly back then. We had a lot of teachers in the system who raised families in the system, who came back to the system, and were teachers for here in the system for a long, long time. And I know they gave up some economic short-term benefit, but in the terms of salary, but in exchange for maybe some other benefits that were still solid benefits and maybe more important to them, but not as costly necessarily to us, or as immediately costly to us. One of those things that was retirement. We used to have a really good retirement program for our teachers, and it used to be one where they could get some hours in and get some years in, and they retired with a decent benefit. And so maybe they gave up a little bit going in terms of salary, but they got a little bit more down the road, which made them stay longer, retire in the system, stay here a lot of times because now they could afford to stay with retirement. And so we had, not only did we have a very stable teacher base, it was unusual for teachers to leave, but we had a system where a lot of the teachers, once they retired, stayed here. And so they were supportive of the system. They helped out. They volunteered. I'll give you a good example right now. We have a Kiwanis Club of Martin County, that we spend a lot of time with youth. We sponsor a lot of our K-Kids, Builders Club, the Key Clubs, all of those programs, high school, middle school, elementary school. And we're very active in trying in helping out in the schools, scholarships for the high school kids, those kind of things. Our president, Jeff Carson, a longtime educator in the system. In fact, he's had multiple generations that he's taught, now retired. But he's very active still, giving back to the community through the system, and it's amazing, And as a prior educator, he still has a love for the system, and so he actively participates. And it's a good thing that he's still around here. Carol McLaughlin, who's also was a teacher in the system, Joan Salzberg, who was a teacher in the system. All of those people are involved. We've got Isabel Rodriguez. She's young, but has left the system now. But she was a previous teacher. So we've had those people, and they make a contribution that's hard to measure, but it has an economic impact, because these same people who used to get paid and are now retired, yes, we're paying them retirement, but they care about the school system. They're in the school system, still volunteering, still giving back. That's an intangible that it's hard to value, but it has value, and it has value overall in the system. So retirement was an issue, was one thing. Time off, leave. People think about leave as vacation, but in Martin County, relative to the teachers, a lot of times leave and the ability to transfer that to other people and to share. And it was part of that community impact. It was part of, if somebody wanted to raise a family in the system and maybe they wanted to take a couple years off, they could do that without having to financially be impacted completely on that type of a scenario. They might have had some vacation that they could accrue and carry over, some days off, some time off that they could use, and it would be paid leave. Yeah, we've got uh, other school systems had leave, had parental leave, but a lot of them didn't have paid parental leave or didn't have vacation time that could be accrued for it, or they weren't necessarily welcomed back into the system, or any other benefits. That's a big thing for a teacher. If you look at a teacher today with the salaries they're making, and they have to spend hundreds of dollars a week to put their child in daycare, you have to have big money. I mean, at that point, you end up working for. So if you've got a situation where you could stay with the child maybe for a period of time, you got some vacation leave. Yes, that costs us some money in the long run, but in the long run, we get people who stay longer because it's a benefit that they can't get somewhere else. It's an intangible benefit. It may not be as expensive as we think, but it's a benefit that makes a big difference to somebody who's family oriented. And I think that's why our school system has been so successful, is that we don't the teachers in the system don't just educate your children, they educate their children. And so they want the best for both. And the good thing we have is many of our teachers, most of them, I would say, view your kids the same as their kids when they're in the system. They treat them just as their own children, and they want them to be safe, and they want them to be taken care of. And like I said, there's a lot of those intangibles, and also in Martin County, we had a system that there's a lot of people in the trades in Martin County. And in the trades, many of them are self-employed. They didn't have things like insurance, and they didn't have certain types of retirement benefits and things like that. So for them to have a spouse who was in the system with that kind of coverage and protecting them as well, it allowed them to continue to stay here in Martin County and make a living and not have to leave the profession that they were in or take another job or go someplace else. So it created that stability for the rest of the economic environment, so that so that the local person could in the trades could stay here and make a living without and still have insurance coverage and some form of retirement for their family. Maybe they weren't putting money in a retirement account like a 401k or an IRA for themselves, but if their spouse was generating an income and retirement through the school system, that would help them, pay their house payment and retire and be in a good shape. And we've taken a lot of that away. And I know you can say that that's, well, we have to, we need to. Well, but my point though is that when we do those kind of things, it has an economic impact. And it's more than just the financial that we might see on the income statement that we might see. It's the long-term impact of some decisions we make can't be reversed or are very difficult to reverse. And a quick story in the business world that kind of is a similar type thing. 3M was one of the most dominant companies in the world from a research and development standpoint, and it was. And there was a couple reasons for it. One, they spend a lot of money or used to spend a lot of money on research and development. 3M used to have a policy, I believe, that, and I'm probably going to forget the percentages, but I think that if their product didn't have at least a 30% profit margin, they would not pursue it. So it might be a viable product, but if it wasn't going to produce a 30% profit margin, they weren't going to spend any money on it. So what happens is, so what happened in 3M is there was a lot of money that was spent on research and development, but within 3M, there was also a lot of latitude within individual departments. Their budgets were allowed to be somewhat inflated, so that individual areas or departments of 3M could pursue internal projects that they thought may have some potential, either to get a product to over 30% profit margin or to be used in another area. And it was a unique thing with 3M to allow your organization to have this kind of slush fund type concept where a group of people in a department could get together and could have some money to spend on developing a project. I'll give you a good example of the one that's the biggest project that, one of the bigger projects that ever came out as a result of that is the sticky note, the Post-it note. Many people may not realize that the Post-it note was a failed project within 3M.
Yep.
The glue didn't work, and that was the idea. The glue was originally developed to be a glue, and but it didn't hold long term. It didn't stick solid enough, and so and it wasn't going to produce the profit margins that they wanted. So they didn't have any use for it. So their research and development area dumped it basically. And my understanding is that a secretary in out west someplace in one of the offices of 3M in one of the divisions was using it to paste papers on notes onto papers because it didn't stick, and they could pull it off later. So they could put notes on the paper and pull it off later, and it didn't stick. And they realized that there was a need for that kind of product. And the markup on it, of course, is huge at this point. Because it was paper and glue that doesn't work. But anyway, and that, because that division, that department had money to pursue that, they actually pursued that internally and developed it as a product that became one of the more successful products for 3M. But the point being that the financial people look at that situation and say, well, you can't have that. You can't have a budget with nothing designated. You can't have a budget where people have that kind of discretion. It's going to hurt your bottom line. And they're right. And interestingly enough, the reason that 3M, I think, is not the major company that it was, that we don't hear as much about it, is that a number of years ago, when 3M changed their compensation plan for their chief executive officer, and they tied that compensation plan to more immediate results. So, most CEOs aren't staying as CEOs of a company for 30 years. They're just not going to be the CEO. They might be in the company for 30 years sometimes, but they're not going to stay as CEO. They're not going to be a CEO for 30 years. So they have a compensation package, and as part of that compensation package, they can make a lot of money. Typically, that is a combination of cash and stock. They're going to be given stock in the company. They have a certain period of time to exercise those stock options and take advantage of that grant. And so they can do that. But what ends up happening is it's a short horizon. It might be a 5-year, it might be a 7-year period of time. At one point, when 3M implemented this shorter horizon type of program tied to the company's stock price, which is in the short term affected by how much income you're producing. The first thing that the CEO that was appointed under that plan did was eliminate all of those cushions in all of those departments. Why? Because it increased the profits significantly, which pumped up the value of the stock significantly. And the long-term impact of that, not developing another Post-it note, not developing another product that was going to generate a 70 or 80% margin, was not going to be seen in that person's tenure, probably even not in the next person's tenure. So now what's happened is that person made a short-term decision, because their compensation was based on short-term, that's going to impact the long-term aspect of that company. And it has. It's had an impact on 3M. There's no question about it. It's not the same company that it was from that standpoint. It's not as innovative. It hasn't produced the products as much that it used to produce. I mean, we don't hear about it as much. But it's still out there, still a viable company, still a good company. But the long-term viability and success of the company has been impacted by a short-term strategy to save money, so to speak, to make the numbers look better. That's in effect what our school system did. We were faced with a significant problem as a result of a previous superintendent who caused a lot of problems and caused a lot of economic problems. So I'm not blaming the school board for this, but at some point, we have to recognize that some of those immediate decisions we made because we had a financial crisis, we have to unwind, or we're going to produce a major educational crisis down the road. And we're already starting to see the symptoms of that right now in our system. And we have to fix that. And I know we've got a lot of people that are, all these fiscal conservatives, but if you want to be a fiscal conservative, then maybe you want to maintain the value of your home. Maybe you want don't be you know don't think at all that even if you don't have kids, that the value of your house is not impacted by the quality of this school system. I guarantee you there are people who move to Martin County solely for the school system. That impacts price. Basic economics. If you've got more buyers who want to live here because of the school system, then somewhere else, it's going to allow you as a seller to get a higher price. So, it does have an economic impact outside of the school system. And that may not be as visible because, again, the sale of your house may be 3 or 4 years from now, or 5 years or 10 years from now, and you may not have noticed it. But it does make an impact both ways. If that school system goes down, I guarantee you that the price of your house relative to Palm Beach County and St. Lucie County is going to be impacted. And you'll see that, and it's going to impact you. If that's money you're counting on for retirement, if that's a place that you're counting on having a cushion that you can get some cash if you need it in retirement, if that's part of your retirement plan, which, by the way, it is for most Americans, because it is their most significant financial investment is in their home, then you need to consider what kind of policies are taking place right now economically that are going to produce a long-term economic impact that's going to be broader than what you think. So I don't even care if you're selfish. I don't care if it's a question of you don't care, you don't have kids in the system or whatever. You're impacted by the system. This is not a political issue. It's an economic issue. And to the extent that that changes in Martin County, it is one of the things that's going to change the value of things that you have investments in, whether it's your property, whether it's a vacation home, rentals, whether it's even just, your job and where you're at here and the type of work you do and the type of work that gets done. And the costs of street repairs and all of those other things. Martin County's tax base is where it is because of the value of our property. That value is going to be impacted. So anyway, getting back to, there was a comment made at the meeting about some of the impact that's happened on the schools. And it was a very good comment, but there was one thing that it kind of got me a little bit, is that, and it kind of just shows generally the kind of the lack of understanding of the economics of the situation, is the comment was made that, we have that the sheriff's department should pay for the security in the schools. And the comment was made, well, they pay for security in airports, and they're required to have security in airports. They're required to have security in public buildings or whatever. They should be required to have security in the school system. Well, that could be fine. We can argue, yes, that's right. They should be required to do that. But the fact of the matter is, the money to do that is going to still come from the same source. So that doesn't financially solve our problem. In other words, if we say to the consumer, let's take this $5 million or $10 million out of the budget because we're going to make the sheriff's department pay it. Yes, the school system no longer has to pay it. But that doesn't mean that the school system will have more money, because the people who pay for the school system, which is you and I that own homes here in Martin County, are going to have to increase our taxes to pay for the sheriff's department. It's the same budget, people. It's the same pocket. Generally, it's coming from the same funding source, real estate taxes. To some degree, there's sales taxes out there, but it's coming from the same source. So you're going to go to the same people and ask for a tax increase. The question is, do you ask for a tax increase for the school system, or do you ask for a tax increase for the police department? It doesn't make any difference. You still have to ask for the increase. Now, the bigger issue is, should that have been mandated by the state? And first of all, Should the state be able to tell us how many police officers we need to have in the schools? I don't think so. I don't think they should be able to do it. But if they're going to do it, then they need to give everybody enough money to pay for it. That was a political sleight of hand. It was an economic sleight of hand, because what they did at the state level is they said, here's what we're going to do. You're going to do this. Every school is going to have a resource officer or a person who can fill that role. But what they politically did, and that's why I say politics is affected by, by the economics of the transaction. What they basically did is they politically gave the counties only enough money to fund a portion of the police force in the schools. In other words, they didn't give them enough money to use the sheriff's department to provide those resource officers. They gave them enough money for the sheriff's office to maybe provide a third of those police officers, which frankly, many of them were already doing. So it was already in their budget. It didn't help any. They didn't solve any of the problem. And so what happened instead is the other 2/3, they want the school system to basically make the decision that they will arm non-teacher staff for that, or that the school system itself will go out and hire retired, security force people to work in the schools. Well, first of all, that's a local decision. It shouldn't be mandated on us, and then how we want to do that. And if our school system, along with our sheriff's department, decides that that's not a safe environment, they do not want an untrained or not a specifically trained person in the school system with a loaded weapon, then that should be our right, and we shouldn't be mandated to fund something that we don't want to do. If the state is going to say to us, we want you to have a resource officer, with a gun in every school, then they either have to provide us with the money or say to the schools, look, we'll let you decide where you're going to allocate your security. And then, we live with that. If we make a bad decision, we live with it. And that's a very tough decision. But my point is that economically, it was not fair to mandate this type of situation and push it back on us. But the fact of the matter is they did it. And so the solution is not to argue about who's going to pay for it, because what you're arguing about is, am I as a consumer going to pay for it out of my right pocket, or am I going to pay for it out of my left pocket? But the bottom line is I'm going to pay for it out of one of those pockets. So we have to come to a solution, either legislatively to get that unfunded mandate removed, or we have to come up with a method to get raised taxes on the consumer. If we politically think that that's something that's worthwhile, and we agree with what the legislature did, then you individually shouldn't have any problem with approving an increase, whether it's for the police department or the school system, to fund that. If you've got a problem with that, it's not the local school system that you should be asking to take the bite. It is the state of Florida that you should be asking to take the bite. And your argument should be in your next election with the people that get elected that pass that kind of stuff. Because if you're going to do those kind of things, those people have to consider the economic impact of it on the local citizen and the local schools. And I guarantee you they're not. They're only considering about what's politically good for them, what's their next election. They don't want to raise, everybody's all up in arms, so they want to do whatever they want to do to make it look good so that they can get elected. They don't want to say to the general public, you need to raise your taxes. So anyway, like I said, it's one of those kind of things where that's an issue that's had an economic impact on us that took place at the state level, and we may not even have realized that it took place. But the answer is not to argue that the sheriff's department should pay it versus the school system should pay it. That's like saying the city should pay it versus the county should pay it. Bottom line is we're all taxpayers. So we may live one place or another, so it may make a difference whether we're in the city or the county. But ultimately, if we're in Martin County, the cost of Martin County is being borne by everybody in here. It may have a different effect where we're at, but it's being borne by everyone. So I really like the concept of where Missy Campbell was going with her with her comments, and she made some very, very good points. My only disappointment was that it doesn't do any good to argue who should pay for it unless who's paying for it is the state of Florida. If they should have argued, yes, the state of Florida will pay for it, and we need to shift it back to them and, withhold some sales taxes to do it or something, then yeah, I'm in favor of that. But to kind of just argue about what pocket I'm going to pay it out of didn't do me much good. We do need to solve this problem, though, and we do need to solve the teacher salary problem, because that's going to have a major impact. Frankly, if you look at it from a practical standpoint, there is a much better chance that not paying our teachers adequately, not providing them with retirement adequately, not providing them with vacation and maternal leave and parental leave adequately is going to have a much bigger impact on us financially than not providing resource officers in the elementary schools. I guarantee you that we've got now, it's a different risk. Nobody wants a loss of life, but I guarantee you that economically, taking out of some of these other issues, it is going to have a much more significant impact on you as a consumer in Martin County by shifting money from the school system and teachers to the sheriff's office and security in this particular case. In the long run, that is going to have a bigger financial impact on you and cost you a lot more dollars than it would the other way around. So anyway, I wanted to kind of throw that out there. It's just something that is one of those issues that we look at some of this stuff and we just don't always look at where the financial impact is coming and what's going to happen there, and why the solution ends up with the same thing. What we really need to do is, like I said, convince people either to vote for the taxes that need to be paid, and that's really the only choice right now, is to increase our taxes, or to vote out some people, or get somebody in Tallahassee who's not going to pass these unfunded mandates and pass them down to us locally. Because, I don't mind if I've got some say in the decision. I don't mind paying the freight, but for somebody else to tell me what to do and then say, by the way, here's the bill for it. It's really easy to spend somebody else's money. That always irritates me. And the state of Florida has done that pretty consistently. They love to spend somebody else's money. And that unfunded mandate issue is probably one of the biggest ones that's out there all the time. Is the state passes these laws and says, these counties cities got to abide by them, but you can't. But we're not going to give you any money to do it. That's just passing the buck is really what it boils down to. So anyway, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about this morning. 220-9788, 220-WSTU if you want to chime in. The other issue was I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on in the river with the system and with what's going on with the river. I know a lot of people feel like we solved the river issue, but we did not. But we have a plan, and what we have to realize is that plan is going to take some time to get implemented. And the question is, how much time and whether we've got enough time. But at the same time, we need to be cognizant of that there's a number of parts to that plan, and we can't just focus on one part of the plan. We can't just focus on say, okay, we're going to put this, we're going to put this reserve out here, and that solves that problem. Yes, it did solve some portion of one problem, but there still is the problem with the number of septic tanks that we have that are leaching into the waterways here, particularly when it rains. We are still dealing with the amount of water that is being flooded down the Kissimmee River and is still running directly in, even though they're trying to change that basin so that it now meanders instead of goes. That isn't done. That's a process that is still being done. And trust me, Disney is still dumping their water Mickey is basically going to the bathroom in our lake. So, we need to make sure that we stop that process, and we do something about it. It was funny. There was an article in the paper, which I thought was kind of interesting. There was about a person who's been here and somebody told me this, and I just saw the article and skimmed through it. But there was an article about a person who had been in the business of some fishing and things like that for a while, and they were leaving here and moving further north, and I think moving up into the Orlando area where the rivers were cleaner, and they were moving. I think they were moving up to somewhere near Lake Apopka. And if anybody is familiar with Lake Apopka, it actually used to be one of the dirtiest lakes in the world. They've cleaned it up now, and they've done a tremendous job to clean it up. Part of the way they cleaned it up was they sent it all down to us. Part of the way they cleaned it up was create a system of lakes down there that were supposed to retain water. There's actually on the western side of Orlando, there's a group of places where there's supposed to be water retention to actually clean some of this water before it was sent ultimately to the Kissimmee. But they weren't bothering with that. They were just, when it rained and there was too much, boom, it just goes. And so what was happening is it was actually collecting some of this sediment from all of the other pollution within Orlando, running it through this system, stopping it there for some period of time. And then when we have a major rain event, it would flush all that water out into the Kissimmee, plus anything that was already still in there, which was all settled on the bottom. It just flush all that stuff into the Kissimmee, and we get all of that stuff. Literally, we get, Mickey's waste, and it was coming down to us. There's a reason Disney owns a district up there. What's it called? A Reedy Creek or whatever.
Bonnet Creek, I think.
Yeah, it's yeah, right.
Reedy Creek or something.
Yeah, they own their own district up there. That's a political district. Why? So they can control all of this stuff without somebody coming in there making them do it. And there's a reason why they did that. And they control that. Trust me, that's Disney that runs that. And so when we start talking about these problems, I have yet to hear a bunch of people getting up in arms about Disney, and Disney was the major reason that the lake is polluted from the north, and a lot of that pollution is from the north. So we focus on one problem, and we tend to get isolated on the problem. We can't. We have to look at some of these other things, and we have to figure out and make sure that everybody is doing their part to eliminate the problem. I guarantee you, if we eliminate all of the flow of stuff coming from Lake Okeechobee down the canal and into the Indian River and out to the Caloosahatchee, if we solve that whole problem, we still will not solve our pollution problem in the rivers in Martin and St. Lucie County and Indian River County. We will not, because that problem has nothing to do with Lake Okeechobee. The toxins that are coming in and some of the bacteria that is coming into the system is not coming from blue-green algae. It is coming from human and animal feces. That is what is coming in there. That isn't in the lake in general. That is coming from runoff from a lot of local estuaries. And it's, I think the number is 39,000 or something septic systems within I think it's just Martin County that were built years and years ago and have never been replaced. That's a problem. And it's one of the problems that we can't just ignore. There's a lot of these problems. And, I know I need some education, and I know other people need education on why this is happening. I heard the other day that I always thought that this blue-green algae situation was primarily a local problem here. We hear so much about it and the toxicity of it and all of that. I have no idea. I'm not a biologist. I have no idea how that stuff generates. But I did hear that it's basically nationwide. We've got problems with this nationwide. So why is that? I mean, we got problems in Oregon. There's places in Oregon where they give you bottled water because you can't drink the river water because of, I mean, the regular water because of the contamination from blue-green algae. So the question is, why is that stuff developing to start with? Where is it? How does it come about? Why does it develop? How does it? We know how it gets bigger because you add fertilizer to anything and it gets big. Any plant's going to grow faster when you add fertilizer to it. Last I looked, some of the best fertilizer was feces. So that's obviously going to produce a growth impact. But is it global warming? Is it Trump? I mean, those are the usual things we blame it on. It's got to be global warming or Trump, but it might be one of those or both of those. But I have no idea. Like I said, I have no idea what causes this stuff. But it is something that we should at least study and figure out exactly what. And we as consumers need to understand so that we know when somebody's telling us what needs to be done, that we know why it needs to be done. We at least understand the basics. And that's kind of, I think, what I'm getting at is right now, I think that we need to start having a little bit more continual education on some of the varied problems and where we are with them and what they mean and what are happening, not political, but actual discussions, scientific and general discussions about what the plan is, what the components of the plan are, what the specifics of the plan are, what is being done, what's on time, what's working, what's not working, what's ahead of schedule, what's behind schedule, and why it makes a difference, and what's happening. I think, I don't think there's enough education. There's more, looking at specific problems and focusing on the specific problem. Right now, we're all focused on the lake and the releases, and yet we were swimming in polluted water for months ahead of that because of the rain. So, we like what we think are simple solutions and simple problems. We like to point our finger at one thing. And, around here, we tend to like to point it at agriculture, but even agriculture, what part of agriculture are we pointing it at? Are we going to point it at, big sugar? Or are we going to point it at dairy? Or are we going to point it at beef and cattle? Are we going to point it at horses and some of the problems there? Are we going to point it at local farmers in Palm City and in that area? Are we going to blame it on there? It's called Palm City Farms. Are we going to blame it on that? What are we going to, it's easy to pick one. Let's find out what the issues really are and why they might be occurring and how they're interrelated, because we know it's not just one problem, and maybe get some education on that. And I think the Economic Council is planning on doing something in that regards coming up next month. So keep an eye out for that. I think again, the Economic Council for years has been very active in terms of education relative to a number of things, schools, rivers, that type of thing. And I know that there's a number of people involved, including myself in the Economic Council, that would like a lot more education on what the issues are, unbiased education on what the issues are. And so I think you'll see some stuff coming out from the Economic Council trying to do some education there, a community education, not a political thing, just so we all can have an opportunity to learn, because it impacts us all, whether it's our jobs, our families, our schools, or whatever. It certainly has had it, and it will have an impact. So that's something that I think I'm a little concerned about right now, is that we're starting to maybe focus a little bit on either that we think we've solved the problem, and so everybody's kind of moving off saying, well, the problem's been solved, or we're focusing now on, well, we didn't solve the problem and this is the problem and we have to solve it. Well, that's probably not it either. We may have the plan in place, but there may be other aspects of the plan that are behind or that aren't being implemented that are still going to make a difference. This is all very, very complicated, I think, and there's no easy solution. If there was an easy solution, we would already had it in place by now. So hopefully this is something that we can get back to. So I know, Mike, you with the news and stuff, you keep up on a lot of that type of thing, and you're probably better educated than the average consumer, so you probably know some of the answers to some of these things. But for me, it's just really confusing to see what happens and why, and not really understanding how some of this stuff takes place, why it takes place, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a big, complicated issue with a lot of stuff, and I think there's very few people that are experts and have a good grasp on all sides of it. I think you have some people that are extremely tuned in on the wastewater that comes out of Lake Okeechobee. You've got some people that are tuned in on the runoff here locally and the septic tanks and the issues that they cause. And I think there's very few people that kind of have that broad understanding of how, or maybe not a broad understanding, but a really good and a really deep understanding of how it all plays together. I think a lot of people probably think that the status quo for the river, which is okay. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but I think a lot of people, they don't even notice that there's an issue with the water until the algae blooms start. And the fact that because I think a lot of what you're saying kind of hinges on important distinctions on certain definitions. There's a difference between polluted water and algae clogged water.
Right.
I mean, like, you can have polluted water that doesn't have blue-green toxic algae all through it.
Right.
And you could say,
and you can have algae that's not toxic. That's the other thing. You can see all this blue-green algae, but it may not be toxic. Blue-green algae.
I think blue-green algae by its very nature is toxic, but there's algae that's not toxic. Right.
Yeah, but I think and that's what I'm not sure, but I even think that just because you have blue-green algae doesn't necessarily mean it's toxic blue-green algae. There's something that because they've tested, they see this blue-green algae and there's levels of toxicity, of course. And so they're some of this stuff they've tested and that said it's not toxic.
Well, but what I've seen is the stuff that they're testing here is that it is toxic.
Yes, the stuff and that's the weird thing, is that they've tested some of this stuff in the lake, and as it was coming out of the lake, and it wasn't testing toxic, but then it's coming down here and it's testing toxic.
I did not see those reports.
Yeah, so
I saw the opposite.
Oh, so and that's why I saw some of that. So the question is, well, why is that? What makes something toxic versus non-toxic? Is it something that's being added on the way? Is it the nitrogen and phosphorus that's being added that's already in the system, or is it and why is that different than the lake, which has some of those things? So I don't know.
I think the important thing to remember and to keep in mind is that the algae is not coming directly from Lake Okeechobee. And when I say that, I mean, it's not like, yes, there's algae that they find in Lake Okeechobee, but it's not like all the algae that they're finding throughout Stewart and the St. Lucie River now. That didn't start in Lake Okeechobee and make its way through the locks and down the canal and into our river. What's happening is the river was primed and had a bunch of ingredients thrown in, and the discharge from Lake Okeechobee was the last straw that needed to make blue-green algae, right? And so when you add the lake water coming out from the discharges, it's mixing in with the water that we already have, and that is what's making the perfect ingredients for toxic blue-green algae, like what we saw in 2016 and like what we're starting to see build. It seems like every day it's getting bigger and bigger, and we're starting to see more and more reports of this stuff coming in. It's a big, complicated issue. It's not just the water from the lake. It's not just the septic tanks. It's not just everything else in between. It's a combination of all that stuff. You've got the witch's brew, the witch's cauldron, and you got all this stuff thrown in, and then you get this nasty blue-green result out of it.
Yeah, and I think and I, like I said, I think a lot of it too is, and again, it's I'm not sure, but some of the toxicity is caused by some of the other stuff that's in it. Like I said, some of the human waste that's in the water system, or the animal waste that's in the water system, wherever that's coming from, dairy farms or people or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's certainly one of the ingredients.
Yeah, and so that's. But again, I would like to know. For example, I know that there's been things put into place on the dairy farmers to stop runoff of dairy waste. Right. I've driven out there and seen some of the stuff that they've done. As you go through the middle of the state, they don't just they can't release, anymore directly into the waterways on their property, but what's going on there, what kind of abuses are taking place, what kind of controls are in place for some of that. I mean, there's the kind of things that I think we need to find out. What's being put in place, what has yet to be put in place, what is in place that is working, what is in place that's not working, why is it not working? Some of those kind of things. It'd be nice to get some of that information. So maybe we'll have an opportunity to get that coming up. Anyway, just wanted to mention a few things today. We're talking about some issues that impact you locally. So hopefully it's something that you can think about. Again, we need to get educated so that we can hopefully make informed decisions. And that's all a process. So stay tuned to what's going on in your community so that you can be educated. And, of course, stay tuned to WSTU Digital 1450, your heritage station, for all of that information. They'll keep you right up to date.